Welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about how do we handle it when we realize that we are not who we thought we would be, right? So on the self-love path, we talk a lot about how to process going through the realization that we are not who other people want us to be, right? We process the whole cultural conditioning, family conditioning, societal conditioning that says this is who we're supposed to be, this is what success is, this is what a good person is. And having those expectations be on us for our entire lives. And then getting to a point where we're like, yo, that's not who I am. I am just not ever going to be the kind of person who works that job, who lives that life, who does that thing that other people want me to do and that other people say is what is good and what is expected. And processing that is a big deal. And it can take a long time, and it can be very painful, and it can be very difficult, especially when we are dealing with situations where us not being who other people expected us to be or wanted us to be leads to like literal rejection in real life, right? Because I know a lot of the time in the self-help personality or spirituality and personal growth world, we're told, just be yourself and then you'll find all these people who love you, and just be your authentic self and you'll find your, soul family, and everyone around you is going to love your authentic self, and you'll attract the people that you're supposed to be around and all this stuff. And I think to a degree that can be true, and it will be true, and it's definitely far more likely that you're going to find people who really like you for who you are when you are being more authentic. But at the same time, we also have to recognize that sometimes when we are being our real selves, when we are accepting who we actually are, we really are going to get rejected. We really are going to find that the people around us are they don't like us. They don't like it. They don't like who we actually are. They are disappointed in us. They do feel like we are not good enough. And that can be a really difficult thing and a really challenging thing to work through. And I love what you're saying. Yeah, I love the Buddha's words about does it help me? Good is manipulation or self-deception. Absolutely. Because the reality is, right, we want to make room for who we actually are, and to make that good enough by our own definition, right? Like that is the path of self-love, is realizing that we are humans who have specific characteristics and specific things that are real and true for us. And there's always room for us to grow. There's always room for us to expand, and that's lovely, and we want to make room for that, and that is a helpful thing to learn and grow and expand and become what we have never been before. But at the same time, we don't want to be continually trying to force ourselves to be something that we are simply never going to be. We don't want to be in a situation where we're living a life saying, this is what I am supposed to be. This is the gold standard. This is the expectation. And anything other than that is not okay, right? Like that's the painful life. Because for most of us, we are going to realize that who we have been indoctrinated we are supposed to be isn't totally true for us, right? Like our parents wanted us to be lawyers, but we are artists. Our parents or culture says you need to have, the spouse and the 2.5 kids and the white picket fence. And that is just not at all what you want to do. You want to be nomadic. You want to be in a polycule. You never want to get married. You don't want to have kids. You want to have way more kids than that. You want to have pets. We have to understand that we live in this society where there are so many rules for what it is to be good enough. And there are so many ways in which we are going to be rejected for not living up to the standard, and learning how to love ourselves anyways, learning how to make room for who we are anyways, is a huge part of finding peace in this life and realizing that it's okay to be rejected. It's okay to be misunderstood. It's okay if people don't validate us, and that we can learn to validate ourselves and to find our own level of safety and our own level of it's okay, even if I'm rejected, I don't lose everything. My whole world doesn't fall apart. I can still survive. I can still be safe. I can still get my needs met. And I can learn to understand and validate my own perspective and my own experience, even if other people are saying, well, that's not valid. That's a huge part of the empowerment path. Okay, so we talk a lot about that in the mystery school. I talk a lot about that in my coaching. We work on the I'm not who other people wanted me to be, and that makes me bad, wrong, shameful. That means I'm failing. And we work on the kind of false belief that we can't be okay if we get rejected, that being rejected is the worst thing in the world, and coming to see that we can be okay. So that's a big part of this path. That's a big part of what we work on, and it's work that a lot of us will usually be kind of doing forever, because as we discover ourselves, as we kind of unfold the layers and layers of the onion that is who we are, there are always going to be times when we realize, like, oh, I'm going to disappoint this person, or I'm going to let down that person, or this just isn't something I can do, or isn't something I can be, and we learn to navigate that. So that's one part of the path. But what I want to talk about today is, what do we do when we are on our self-love path and we're really discovering who and what we are, and we disappoint ourselves? Because this is something that I think we rarely talk about, and something that really needs to be addressed in the spirituality, self-help, and personal growth world is what happens when we don't live up to our own expectation. When we realize that we're not going to ever love ourselves enough to become who we thought we would be, to step into the life we thought we would have, and to have to come to terms with the reality that we are not who we thought we would be and what we thought would make us happy, right? So that's the very first thing to kind of understand in the whole, how do I unpack I am not who I thought I would be? Step number one in that is allowing ourselves to realize that we likely had an expectation that we were going to become this or that person. And in so doing, we were going to find happiness, we were going to find satisfaction, we were going to find safety, we were going to find pleasure. And it can be very disappointing to realize that we are never going to become that person, right? So for instance, many of us, right, are finding out that we're far more introverted than we thought we were. Just as an example, right? Many of us may have had this expectation that one day I'm going to love myself enough, I'm going to do my work enough, I'm going to heal enough that I'm going to become this outgoing, expressive, life of the party person. And then I'm going to have all of these friends and this huge community, and it's going to be this great, awesome thing. And then the more we get to know ourselves, and the more we really spend time with who we actually are and how we actually feel and what is actually true for us, the more we start to recognize that we just have the kind of body, the kind of nervous system, the kind of personality that needs more quiet time, that is not ever going to be the big, loud party person, that is always going to need time to decompress and be by ourselves, and that we just aren't going to be that social butterfly that we hoped we would be. right? So let's focus on that for a bit. So this whole idea of like my personality isn't the personality that I thought I would have when I healed myself. Okay? So that thinking is something that I think a lot of us come into the self-love path with, that we don't realize or recognize we're coming into the self-love path with. That we are coming into the self-love path with an idea that if I love myself enough, if I do my work enough, if I heal myself enough, if I make myself safe enough, I am one day going to become this person who can live this life that I have idealized in my mind is the life that will make me happy. And it may not have anything to do with what other people have told us we should be. Right? Like when we kind of deconstruct it, it might not come down to, this is what my parents wanted me to be, or this is what society said I should be, or I learned this from someone. But rather, it will come down to this is what I thought I needed to become so that I could be happy. This is what I thought I needed to become so that I could feel satisfied in life. And learning to see that we have these stories and these expectations of ourselves, and that we truly believe that if I were to become this person, I would be happy, is a big thing to realize. Okay, so what about unconditional love coming from heart? Like when I become instead, if I become never happened. And this is the self-love path, right? It's learning how to love the version of you that actually exists right now. And so we're going to get into that as we go. But again, most of us are unconsciously coming to the self-love path with the self-improvement mindset. Meaning, I am coming to the path hoping that if I love myself enough, if I heal myself enough, I will become this version of myself that I have already predetermined I am supposed to become in order for me to be happy and in order for me to be living my authentic life, where we assume things about ourselves, about who we think we are supposed to be if we are being our authentic self, rather than coming to the path of self-love with an open mind and curiosity about who we are going to become or who we are. And so a lot of us, again, are doing our self-love work from this place of already assuming we know who we are supposed to be. We know what our real authentic self is, and that we're just not doing it because we're not loved enough yet. Right? So we have when I'm loved enough, I'm going to be capable of being a lawyer. When I'm loved enough, I'm going to be capable of being outgoing. When I'm loved enough, I'm going to be capable of yes, of course. I'm going to be capable of getting my shit together and being completely organized all the time and knowing I'm going to have this amazing career and I'm going to accomplish all of these things. And we keep feeling like I'm not doing the path right. I'm not doing self-love right because we're not ending up there. And that, again, is us having an expectation of ourselves versus being able to say, who am I actually? Right? So for me, on this path of self-love, I did have to realize that my true personality is not ever going to be a super extroverted social butterfly who can be social all the time. And I really believed that that is what I needed in order to feel good in life. I had this whole paradigm in my mind that a huge part of the reason I didn't feel good was because I didn't have enough friends and I wasn't surrounded by people enough. And I didn't have a big enough community, and I believed that that was because I was not outgoing enough and I wasn't putting myself out there enough and all of these things. And that the only way I was ever going to find happiness was if I became this highly social, I can be in all places and do all things kind of person. Yeah? And as I started to really get to know myself and pay attention and acknowledge what was true about me, I had to come to the revelation that I just do not have one of those nervous systems. I am not like my husband. For instance, my husband is a social butterfly. He could literally hang out with warm bodies 24/7 and be the happiest clam on the planet. He loves having people around. It really actually does energize him. It's his thing, right? Whereas for me, it doesn't matter how regulated I am. It doesn't matter how much I enjoy those people. It doesn't matter how great I feel that day. It doesn't matter how supported I am. At some point, I get to a point where I'm like, I'm done. And I need space. And I need to be alone. And there's only so much human interaction that I can actually handle. And coming to that revelation that I wasn't going to find happiness in having this expanded social life was really hard, because it meant that I had to completely reconfigure what I needed in terms of human interaction and what was going to make me happy, what was actually going to make me happy. I had to learn how to spend time with myself and be okay in my own presence, because I needed that. So not investing in learning how to really recuperate and recover and be by myself when I am by myself, because I was constantly trying to force myself to become social, meant that I was constantly burnt out when I was being social. And then when I wasn't being social, I just kept thinking, this is the reason I'm unhappy, because I don't have these people around. Instead of being like, well, no, it's because when I am alone, which is what I need sometimes, I have never learned how to make that a nourishing environment for myself. Right? So it wasn't that I just wasn't social enough. It was that I wasn't honoring the fact that I am more introverted than extroverted. I need time by myself, but that time needs to be spent in ways that are actually nourishing for me. You see, the me that actually exists, versus trying to figure out how to just recover so I can be social again. Okay, so what about happiness is ability to read emotions? I guess it was noisy place to hear my own inner voice. Happiness is ability to read emotions. Again, I do think that there is a huge emotional mastery is something that I talk about a lot in self-love. And learning to understand your own emotional cues and what your emotions are saying to you is a huge part of figuring out who you are and what you want, right? Like I said, even in the example that I was giving there was absolutely a part of my mind that was telling me this is who I am. And when I'm healed, I'm going to be this way. But my emotions, when I was trying to force myself to be like that, were telling me a completely different story. It wasn't making me happy. It wasn't making me satisfied. So I had to accept, okay, I'm not this person and I'm never going to be this person. So what is actually going to make me happy? Because at the end of the day, becoming that person isn't the thing that's going to make me happy. Because I'm never going to be that person. And I had to learn to love the person that I actually was, the person that I actually am, and then how to support that person, right? That is always the bottom line of where we get to on this self-love path with everything we talk about. We always get down to, okay, the thing that's actually going to make us happy, the thing that's actually going to make us feel good is not trying to become something so that we will be happy. It's not about having an idea or a theory of what we should be or what should make us happy in terms of our expression and trying to force ourselves to do that. But instead, it's about learning how to connect with the you that actually exists right here, right now, today. Meaning, what are my energy levels today? What are my emotions telling me today? Where is my physical body at today? What am I actually genuinely interested in today? And how can I start to build a life around those realities versus trying to force myself to become some hypothetical version of me and thinking that will make me happy when I become that. Impressive idea of learning to connect with nature of body. Yes. Where am I actually at today? What are my needs today? What are my emotions today? Yeah? This is how we figure out what's actually going to make us happy. So with this, I encourage everyone who's listening right now to think about, what are you telling yourself in terms of, I am doing this path in the hopes that I will one day become X, Y, and Z? What are we hoping that we are going to turn into? And thinking, I'm not going to be happy until I become X, Y, or Z. What are the stories you have about how you're supposed to be expressing or what you're no longer going to be expressing? The habits you're going to have, the habits you're not going to have, the personality you think you're going to have, the job you think you're going to have. And then second question is, why do you think you need those things in order to be happy? Is that coming from a genuine desire to express this thing that you feel is truly who you are? Or is that coming from a, I am trying to force myself to become that because I think it will make me happy if I become that? Right? There's a huge difference between this is something that is absolutely true to me and I just kind of feel like I can't die with this still inside of me. That feeling of like, this is just so true to me and I feel so upset when I can't express it. I feel out of sorts and I feel suppressed and pressed down when I can't express this thing. When that is the case, What we want to work on is deconstructing all the things that are telling you can't be that and you can't do that, right? But when it's, I am trying to force myself to be this thing, it doesn't actually feel natural to me. It doesn't feel supportive for me. It doesn't actually feel like it's coming from an organic place. But rather it's this version of me that I'm expecting myself to become every day when I'm doing my work. Like I'm literally doing my self-love work and being like, are you there yet? Are you there yet? Are you that yet? Have you changed yet? That is where we want to say, okay, red flag. Right? So if we were to put this in the context of a relationship with someone else. So let's just say you're in a friendship and you have a friend who's showing up and spending time with you and hanging out with you and loving you. But there's always this underlying expectation that if they spend enough time with you and if they love you enough and if they hang out with you enough, you are going to then start to do this very specific thing for them. Right? There's always this bottom line of, if I am your friend good enough and long enough, you're gonna loan me $100. Would that feel like a very supportive, authentic, fun friendship to be in? Knowing that the only reason that they're really hanging out with you and being nice to you is because they're hoping that if they do that enough, you're going to give them money. I'm going to assume that wouldn't feel very good. Right? We wouldn't really want to be in that kind of friendship. But that's exactly what we're doing to ourselves when we come onto the self-love path with this predetermined expectation of who we're trying to make ourselves become. Because then we're not actually giving ourselves room to be our authentic self. We're not actually giving ourselves room to discover who we really are and how we want to express. We're not actually discovering ourselves. We're just coming in with expectation, and we're just trying to force ourselves to become something. And that is never going to feel good. That's never going to be supportive. And in that, we are likely never going to find real happiness. Because a lot of the time, we are wrong about who we thought we were going to be and what we thought was going to make us happy. Right? It turns out, for me, learning how to balance actually having nourishing alone time so that when I am with people, I am filled up, and then being able to say, okay, I'm done now. And now I need to spend time alone in a way that's actually nourishing versus it just feeling lonely because I don't know how to connect with myself. That was the real path. That is what really needed to happen. But if I had just kept trying to force myself to be social forever and feeling guilty and like I was failing every time I was clearly too overwhelmed to be social, I was going to feel like a failure all the time. It was never going to make me happy because I was never going to be that person. And letting go of trying to become that person didn't mean letting go of happiness the way that I thought that it would. That's what we are going to find. Accepting who we really are and learning to make that okay, and then figuring out how to support that person will make you far happier than becoming anything that you think you need to be right now in order to be happy. Does that make sense? Okay, I am seeking the worst case of myself and working on improvement of it. And that, again, is a huge shift that we make on the self-love path. The self-love path is all about saying, okay, these worst parts of myself are not bad. These things that I think are wrong with me are not actually what's wrong with me. Rather, these are either real, true parts of who I am that I have learned I am not allowed to be, that I have learned I must reject, that I have been indoctrinated into believing are bad, wrong, and shameful, when in real reality, they're just who I am. And they are totally, perfectly acceptable and exactly fine. And the more I allow myself to step into it, yes, I may be rejected, I may be misunderstood, people might not like it, but the more I allow myself to express it, the more I'm going to see it's fine, it's great, it's just who I am, and there's nothing wrong with it. Or we have coping mechanisms, we have self-sabotage, we have numbing, we have all of these things because we are trying to deal with the adverse experiences that we experienced that we have no other tools for dealing with. Right? This whole, I am going to become this one day, and feeling like I am bad if I am not that, is really rooted in, this is what I perceived caused me pain. This is what I perceived was wrong with me. That was the reason I didn't get the love that I wanted, the reason I didn't get the safety I wanted, the reason I didn't get the provision that I wanted, and I have to fix this thing about me in order to get those things. Or again, we're dealing with the adverse experiences that we experienced where we had no other choice but to develop coping, numbing, self-sabotage because we weren't supported in dealing with the aftermath of these adverse experiences, right? Where we didn't have a secure connection with our caregiver and therefore never learned to feel secure inside of ourselves, where we were deeply rejected by our friends at school and learned that it was because I'm too quiet or I'm too loud or I'm not fun enough or whatever. And then we're rejecting ourselves and rejecting ourselves and rejecting ourselves. Maybe, again, we are deeply codependent and learned that we have to please everyone all the time. And then in order to cope with that, in order to cope with the stress of that, we notice that we have, numbing behaviors. We binge Netflix. And we think the thing that's wrong with me is that I'm binging Netflix. Instead of being able to identify, no, the reason I'm binging Netflix is because I'm so overwhelmed by trying to please everyone all the time that I don't have anything in my life that actually makes me feel good. And this is just my one way of escaping that. So it's not that there's this bad part of me. I'm doing this thing to try to help myself. So what do I actually need, right? I need to learn how to set boundaries. I need to learn how to say no. I need to learn to be in my own space. I need to learn how to disappoint people and be okay. That's really what's going on. You see, so the whole self-love path is realizing that we don't have worst parts of ourselves. We have coping. And we have authentic parts that are just who we are, right? So again, to bring it back to what we're talking about today, sometimes on this path, you are going to realize that these things you thought were wrong with you are just who you are. Right? You're going to realize you're a loud person. And you've spent your whole life believing that you need to learn how to be calm and collected and this kind of meditative person. And you're going to discover, that is just not my personality. That is not who I am. I am never going to be that person. I'm loud and kind of obnoxious. And we need to learn how to be okay with that, right? I'm not going to become the meditating monk. And that's okay. I don't have to. I don't have to fit myself into that box. I'm allowed to be how I am. And slowly discovering that this is what's going to make us happy. Okay, now the next thing I want to talk about before we're done here today is when we realize that there are certain limits to our capacity to do the things we wanted to do. Okay, so we've talked about our personalities and all this stuff. And yeah, right? Learning to accept that you are who you are and that you're going to have to find happiness in supporting who you really are right now versus the hypothetical version of you you're trying to become. That's one part of it. But then the other part of it is many of us have dreams and goals and things that we want to achieve and things that we thought were going to make us happy that we're going to realize our physical bodies are never going to be able to do. That because of circumstance, we're never going to have the resources or the access or the capacity to do that. That there are things we wanted to express and things we wanted to do that for whatever reason just aren't going to be in the cards for us. And this is one of, I think, the most painful parts of being alive, is realizing that sometimes the dreams we had for ourselves and the things that we really think we need to have and that we want to express that are true to us are just not going to be available to us. That is hard. Hi. That is really, really tough. Okay, so again, I'll just share from my personal experience. I'm chronically ill. So I definitely have a part of my personality that is in love with travel and change and being spontaneous and doing exciting things. This is a big part of my real, true personality. I do love that. But I also exist in a body that is incredibly sensitive, that isn't capable of just getting up and going and doing all of these things that my mind or my real personality wants to do sometimes. And that is reality. I cannot always go and express and live the way that I want to live because of circumstance, right? There are people out there who wanted to be a performing artist or wanted to write a book and be on the bestseller list or whatever it is, wanted to accomplish something, wanted to achieve something. And they truly have amazing gifts to offer. And for whatever reason, they weren't supported in their childhoods. They, socioeconomic factors. They don't have the right look. They don't have the right whatever. And because of the way society is, because of the way life has gone, they're not going to be able to live that reality. That sucks. And it hurts. And I really want us to be able to first acknowledge and validate that that's a real thing. And many of us are spending a lot of our lives blaming ourselves for not being able to achieve and express that stuff, because accepting the reality that the reason we can't isn't actually because of us, that we don't have control over that, is incredibly challenging and incredibly painful. Okay? So first things first is, again, I want you to look at your life. And I want you to look at all the places where you're saying, the reason I am not this or that, or the reason I can't express myself, or the reason I'm not experiencing the things that I want to experience, or pursuing the things that I want to pursue in the way that I wish that I could pursue them. Where are you saying that is my fault? It's because I lack discipline. It's because I'm not good enough. It's because I'm not trying hard enough. If I just shame and blame and guilt myself enough, I will get myself there. Right? Like for years, I was like, it's your fault. You're not eating right. You're not doing the things you should be doing. You're not prioritizing the right things. The reason your body can't do these things, the reason you're in pain, it's not because you're chronically ill. It's because you suck. It's because you're doing it wrong. It's because you should have healed and you didn't. It's because you're not whatever. Because to me, it felt better on a level to say, if I just blame myself enough, if I am just hard on myself enough, every time I experience the limit of my body for stopping me from being able to do the things that I want to do, I can feel like I could get over it. I can feel like I can make it different. If it's my fault and I blame myself enough, we're going to feel like we can get to a place where we can fix it. Because if it's my fault, I can fix it. Right? We look at how we're not expressing ourselves in our art the way that we want to. And we just say, it's because I'm not disciplined enough. It's because I'm not trying hard enough. Okay, what about accepting consequences of own choice? I'll talk about that in a second. It's because I'm not trying hard enough. It's because I'm not doing good enough. Instead of, okay, well, these people I'm comparing myself to and saying, I should be as good as them. I should be doing as much as them. They are doing their art every day. And they're amazing. And I'm not doing it. Why am I not doing it? Why am I not as accomplished as them? And saying, it's just because I suck. It's just because I'm not trying hard enough. When in reality, it's like, well, okay, they were supported by their parents and I wasn't. They didn't have to go and get a real job and a career to support themselves. And I did. They didn't get overwhelmed the way that I did. They had a different experience than me. It's not because I didn't try hard enough. It's because I don't have the same life as them. And so that can be heartbreaking. And we can allow ourselves to be upset about that and to be jealous and to wish things had been different for us. And that's usually the first step that we need to take in accepting, is grieving the things that are holding us back from doing what we want to do that are genuinely not our fault. And letting ourselves just be upset about that instead of turning that upset in on ourselves. Because that's what we're doing. We're upset that we're not able to do the things we want to do. And instead of being upset with the circumstances we have no control over that are truly impacting that, we're turning that upset in on ourselves to try to give ourselves a feeling of power. Okay, so it's that desire to have a sense of control, which is a very real desire. But it's almost as if, in this case, it's turned against us and become a blame instead of empowering. Exactly. Because the reality is, it's not your fault. If the problem is not that you lack discipline, but that you weren't supported in your childhood the same way that these people were, you can blame yourself for having lack of discipline all you want. It doesn't fix the problem. right? It's like saying my canoe is filling up with water and it's because water's coming over the side, so I just need to keep bucketing the water out the side or building up the sides, when the reality is there's a hole in the bottom of the canoe. You can build the sides up as high as you want. It is not going to stop the water from getting in the boat because there's a hole in the bottom. So blaming yourself for lack of discipline when the reality is you didn't get the same support as other people, right? You can blame yourself for the rest of your life. It's never going to get you where you want to go. It's just going to make you feel like shit, right? So it's as if we're comparing outcomes without taking context in the larger situation into account. Exactly. So where we are struggling to express the way we want to express and to have the experiences we want to have and to be the people that feel like this is who I really want to be, we have to first take a step back and say, okay, where am I blaming myself? Where am I blaming myself for the fact that I'm not that? Or the fact that I'm just not there yet? Where am I assuming that because I'm not there yet, it's never going to happen? Or that I'm missing it? Or that I'm failing? Or that there's something wrong with me? That's the first key, right? Shame, blame, and guilt are always lies. So wherever we are saying, this is my fault and because I am shitty, that I am not able to do the things and live the life I want to live, that's our first clue that we're out of alignment with reality. And then we want to look at the context of our lives. Is it really true that I'm just not trying hard enough? Or I'm just not doing good enough? Or are there circumstances that were out of my control and are in some ways out of my control still that are impacting me? And we have to give ourselves time to grieve that. Okay? That's where the spiritual and self-help world says, well, now you're being a victim. No. You're processing your very real, lived experience of having been victimized by life. Because here's the thing. All of us are going to be victimized by life sometimes. That is the truth. We are all going to be in situations where it is not fair, where we are not given what we need, where we experience adverse things that are outside of our control, that are not because of us. And that sucks. And that's painful. And it does us no favors to pretend that that doesn't exist. We need to allow ourselves to grieve that and to acknowledge that. Because the alternative is we're either going to keep denying reality and pushing for a thing that we have no control over in our positive thinking all the time and just deluding ourselves and never actually getting closer to what we want, because that's a delusion. Or we're going to keep beating ourselves up for a thing that isn't our fault. The alternative to not going into victim mentality is delusion. So we acknowledge, we let ourselves get upset. And then we look for the power we do have. So we may not be able to do everything we want to do. We may not have a guarantee that we are ever going to get to that place. But that does not mean that we can't continue to pursue it in the ways that we are capable of pursuing it. That doesn't mean that we can't integrate it into our lives in the ways that we are actually capable and have it at least a little bit versus not at all because we're just sitting there blaming ourselves, right? So for me, it's learning that I can travel. I just can't travel as much as I want. And I have to have some pretty good habits in place in order to be able to do that, right? So I can't necessarily be as spontaneous and whatever as I want to. But that doesn't mean that I'm chained to my home and I can never do anything. But it does mean that, right, it's harder for me than it is for people who are able-bodied. And I have to validate that. And I have to acknowledge that. And instead of trying to become the person who can just do that and continually destroying my health as I did, it became, okay, no, I need to acknowledge and validate that I have these limits and I have these things I need to do to take care of myself if I am going to do that, right? So I figured out a way of being able to do it the way that I am capable of doing it by acknowledging my limits, by acknowledging the reality of where I'm actually at, and then making a plan for how I can do what I can do within that, instead of constantly fighting with reality, right? So maybe you're not going to be able to do your craft 7 days a week, 8 hours a day like these other people. And we can get upset about that. We can be mad about that. We can validate that. And then we say, okay, but what am I capable of? Right? Maybe I have to let go of the dream of that. But that doesn't mean I have to completely let it go. Nor does it mean that I should keep pushing myself to try to do a thing I'm never going to be able to do. Instead, I'm going to acknowledge the reality of who I am, the resources that I have, the circumstances I'm currently in, and then I'm going to do as much as I can. I'm going to let myself pursue it to the degree that I am actually capable. And I'm not going to beat myself up for what I'm not capable of. I'm just going to keep building. I'm just going to keep building. One step at a time. Okay, so I love to accept my own 1% real result instead of 99% unreal one. Exactly. So accepting the consequences of our own choice, I've heard that used as a subtle form of victim blaming rather than encouraging self-loving. I agree with that. Right? So again, when we look at it and we say, okay, but this is truly the result of my own choice, my own terrible actions. I fucked up my own life. Even in that, we need to be able to take a step back and look for the innocence in what we did. We need to take a step back and realize there's a reason I did that. That was the best I knew at the time, right? So many of us use our hindsight as a weapon against ourselves. Now you know that you would do something different. Now you see that what you did didn't work and that something else might have worked better. Now you have the capacity to do something different. But you only know that because you made the mistake, quote unquote, that you made. The reality is you did the best you could at the time. So sometimes that means we hurt ourselves, or we harmed ourselves, or we hurt someone else, or we limited ourselves. And that's okay. We then just want to say, okay, what did I learn from that? How did that inform me? How can I have compassion for the me that existed back then, only knowing what I knew back then? I didn't know what I know now. I didn't have the clarity I now have. We have to stop using our hindsight against ourselves. That's how we accept the consequences of our own actions, is we see the innocence in it. We see that we always have done the best we could with what we had. And then we can grieve and be upset about the fact that it didn't lead us where we wanted to go. That's okay. But we have to do that with compassion. We did our best. We were trying our best at the time. Now we know better. Now we would do something different. Okay. That means we learned. So then now moving forward, what can we do differently? How can we support ourselves differently? How can we be more on our own side? That's how we take responsibility for the consequences of our own actions. I did my best. What do I know now that I didn't know before? How can I use that to move forward? Okay? So that's my talk on what if you are not the person you thought you would be. Where are you telling yourself I have to become something in order to be happy? Instead of saying, who am I? And how do I support that person? Because who am I and how do I support that person is actually how you are going to be happy. So I like to question myself instead of blaming. How can this be applied in life? See the best and the worst seeds of inner truth. Yes. And then the second thing is, when there are truly things that we really want to be and that we really want to express that we feel like we can't and we're blaming ourselves, I want you to look at the bigger picture. I want you to step back and put your life in context. If you're blaming and shaming yourself, you're not seeing reality. You're not seeing the truth. You need to put your life in context. You need to see where there were things that were limiting you that had nothing to do with you, where it wasn't your fault. Grieve the places you were a victim. And then start to figure out, okay, from this place of real reality that I'm actually in, how can I support myself the best that I can in doing the things that I want to do instead of trying to force myself to be this thing? I might not be able to travel all the time, but how do I support the body that I actually have so I can do it to the degree that I can? Maybe I can't express my art 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I can do 2 or 3 hours. It might not ever be what I want it to be, but it doesn't have to be nothing. And so how can I give myself permission to enjoy what I actually am capable of instead of constantly comparing it to what I wanted it to be? How can we start to enjoy the lives that we have? And balancing that with, you're allowed to be upset. Okay, you're allowed to be upset that you weren't given the opportunities and the circumstances to fully express what you wanted to. You're allowed to be upset about that. You're allowed to grieve that. Do that instead of blaming yourself. And then you will find your empowerment for what you can do. And then you'll be able to enjoy it so much more because you're not just sitting there blaming yourself the whole time. Okay? And then finally, consequences of your own actions. Don't use your hindsight against yourself. Go back and look at the you that actually made that choice. What did they want? What did they need? What were they doing? How was that the best I knew at the time? How can I be compassionate with that past version of me? How can I clean up the mess that I made? And what did I learn from it? Okay? Okay. So that's all for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope this was helpful. And I will see you next week. Bye.